friends, and welcome back to the RevRx podcast. I'm Chad Potts, and I'm your host. Today, we're going to have a conversation that sits at the very heart of the gospel. My guest today is Isaac Brickner. Isaac leads the Los Angeles branch of Jews for Jesus, a ministry that's been around for over 50 years with a singular focus. They're laser focused on relentlessly pursuing God's plan for the Jewish people, for salvation of the Jews. You see, Isaac's story was changed in one generation because one believer was bold enough, a Christian believer was bold enough to share Jesus with his family. And years later, standing at the Western Wall, Isaac received his call to the Jewish people. He heard these three words on his heart: they don't know. And so he spent his life making sure that the people of his very heritage, Jewish people all over this world, that they know about the good news of Jesus. If you've ever wondered how Jewish and Jesus fit together, if you've ever wondered how to love your Jewish neighbors with wisdom and courage in a tense cultural moment such as this, if you've ever wondered why it's important to us as Christians today in America to understand or to empathize or to support Israel, then you're in the right place. We're going to talk about identity. We're going to talk about how biblical feasts that are now celebrated and commemorated by Jews actually point straight to Jesus, and why the best way to support Israel today is not to take some big political stand, but to pray for their salvation, for them to trust in the hope of the gospel, Israelis and Palestinians alike. Don't get lost in the politics, guys. Grab a seat, open your heart, and let's go. I introduce you to my new friend, Isaac. Thank you so much for being here on the RevRx podcast. What a privilege it is to have you here on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chad. It's a privilege to be here. I'm honored to be a guest here, man.
Yeah. Well, you're a part of an organization, a greater organization called Jews for Jesus, and I want to get into that in a second.
Sure.
Before we do that, though, man, I'd love for you to just unpack your story. I have chills from the story you told me a minute ago about how your family's story changed in one generation and the impact that God can have on that. So, man, tell us who Isaac is. How did you get here? How did you become the man sitting in the studio today here on the RevRx podcast?
Yeah, thanks, man. It's a privilege to unpack that a little bit. I'm just a Jewish kid from San Francisco. And I serve here with Jews for Jesus in Los Angeles. I lead our Los Angeles branch, and I moved here pretty much right after high school. And my story cannot be told without telling my family's story, which is something that I think growing up, it frustrated me because my dad's in ministry, his dad's in ministry, his father-in-law was in ministry. And it's just the joke within the Jewish community is when you grow up, you can be a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure. And within my family, it was totally different because everyone was in ministry, pastors, evangelists, etc. And that's because several generations ago, back in Ukraine, there was this Christian businessman praying for a witness to the Jewish people, desiring to reach Jewish people with the gospel. And he had an apprentice who was from the Jewish community who came to him, and he ended up leading him to faith in Jesus. And that was my great-great-grandmother's first husband, who had passed away. She remarried to my great-great-grandfather, but basically through that one encounter changed the course of my family's history. And every generation since then, we've actually been involved in ministry to our own people.
Wow.
Maintaining our heritage as Jewish followers of Jesus, that distinctive of people who are part of what Paul calls the remnant of Israel, people who are following Jesus unapologetically as Jews, not kind of capitulating to just say, oh, it's maybe a cultural part of my heritage that used to be important, but now I'm just going to kind of get lost within this assimilation process within the church, which I love the church, but preserving cultural distinctions are important. And I think that's actually a unique calling that God has given to Jewish followers of Jesus. So that's one part of it I have to kind of like explain. But for myself, growing up in San Francisco, public school education all the way, really difficult to kind of stand up for faith in any way without looking very weird, and let alone also like claiming Jewish identity and faith in Jesus.
Yeah.
Walking
Kind of a
really
double whammy there in San
weird,
Francisco.
like
Yeah.
tightrope
Yeah.
of like identity. And I'm a millennial. I was born in late 80s, like smack dab in the middle of that generation. Identity is like became such a huge thing in my like coming of age. And so it was much easier to just kind of like stuff that down and pretend like it wasn't that important to me and just kind of fit in. And so I resonate a lot with, like in the book of James, what he calls a double-minded man. This idea of like believing one thing and doing another thing. That was very true of me, as it is a lot of kids who grew up within the faith, and kind of had to come to a point. Really, when I was 19, I moved out of the house. I was here in Los Angeles. I was going to a new church plant, and kind of just wanted to see if I actually was going to stick with it, honestly. Like, I had seen God do some pretty great things in my life, so I couldn't deny who he was and the truth of the gospel. I had seen God do amazing things, but didn't know if I was going to actually like take the plunge and live for him as an adult, as a young adult. And then just a simple sermon. It was a sermon on Peter's denial of Jesus, where the pastor kind of let you trace like, how many steps away from Jesus have you really taken in your life? And I was like, I'm not that far, am I? And then I realized, oh, okay, I'm living my own way. There was a definitive moment, and it was that summer actually after that church service where I think first experienced like and understood the grace of God, that I traveled to Israel for the first time. Not for the first time as an adult. I had traveled for like my bar mitzvah and a couple other times, but first time as an adult, I went with this program that Jews for Jesus has. And we were traveling around the country. We came to the Western Wall in Jerusalem, which is like kind of the holiest site in Judaism. And I like went up to the wall, and you put like prayers on these little papers and like place them in the cracks of the wall to kind of like pray for peace of Jerusalem and all these things. I'm standing there, and to my right and to my left are these ultra-Orthodox Jewish men davening, which is like a prayer practice where you like kind of go like this, back and forth. And I was just like overwhelmed with emotion. And I heard God whisper just 3 words, "They don't know." And I just like, it wrecked me. So at the time, I didn't recognize that as a direct call to ministry, but in retrospect and in processing and in prayer with friends and stuff, it was very clear, like that's what that was. And so I haven't really looked back from that moment.
Love it. Man, I've got chills all over listening to that story. And man, isn't that Oliver's call?
Mm-hmm.
They don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and looking around this world at the state of our country right now, and feeling that sense that God's whispering to us, who's going to tell them?
Yeah. That's Romans 10. Like, how will they know unless like someone goes and preaches, you know?
Absolutely. And what a great call of ministry into ministry that was. So you're now with Jews for Jesus. And I want to unpack a little bit though before we get into that, because your story is so relatable. You know, I think I grew up in the Bible Belt, right? But even so, you know, it's almost like it's more unpopular not to go to church over here than it is to have faith. But real authentic faith is different. And, you know, living out the fruit of the Spirit, living out Christ-likeness, that looks radical everywhere. And that looks radical in every generation and in every part of this world. There's always this temptation, and I told you I pastor young adults, and so that's kind of that college and young family age, and that's where, you know, we leave the comforts of our home And then we have to kind of believe what we believe because we believe it now, and not just because it's what mom and dad believe or that's what I was told to believe. And there becomes this real sense of, I feel like I need to suppress that to fit in. And that's what you experience. And that's really powerful because so many of us, I think, can relate to that. There's this temptation to fit in, but I want to kind of edge that by saying, if you're fitting in this world, that's not the goal here. And you sensed that, didn't you? You had that double-minded conviction of sorts. I believe one thing, but I'll look a different way on the outside. And so, I wanted to say that to our listeners. We've all been there. We get that. No one wants to look different. No one wants to be eccentric or to stand out in a crowd. But we kind of have to if we're going to be doing this Christianity thing. True, authentic walk with God looks radical. And then as you went through, and I want so bad to go to Israel. I'm not sure now. Maybe we'll speak to this in a minute. I don't know if now's a great time, but and it may be fine. But I feel like there's just something powerful about walking in the world where our Bible was written. And I really admire that, you getting to the wall and God putting that call in your life right there. I mean, what a better place for that, right?
Yeah, and I almost cringe telling the story, to be honest, because it's such a stereotype.
It is.
It's of course it's going to happen there, right? But
it's perfect. Yeah.
It is powerful. I love to encourage people to visit and to because it does help take the Bible seriously when you sit there and go oh, this happened right there. It's kind of for believers especially, I think apologetics are more important for people who are believers to reinforce faith than it is for people who are not believers yet.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And it's a powerful apologetic to just say this is not a fairy tale. This is real. But I will also be the first to discourage Christians when they go from treating it like Bible Disneyland. Because it's a sincere temptation to just kind of I'm going to buy the t-shirt. I'm going to take the picture. I'm going to do all the things and get the anointing oils and all the the junk that people bring back.
Take my selfie next to the, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bucket list item for me. And I really hope I can make that happen soon, but praying about it, Lord's going to open that door when it's time.
That's right.
But transitioning over, so Jews for Jesus. You mentioned to me offline before we started, there's a single-minded theme, a single-minded purpose. Tell us about the organization that you're involved with. Tell us about the goal, the mission, the purpose. And I love it so much, but I'm going to let you say it.
Yeah. We're over 50 years old as an organization now. We started in 1973. And our mission is that we relentlessly pursue God's plan for the salvation of the Jewish people. And that's a mission that we can pursue until Jesus comes back, because that's part of his plan. And we know that. So it's something that really defines our core value. Top core value is passion for the lost. What we do is reach Jewish people with the gospel because we are Jewish people who've been transformed by the gospel. And all of our frontline ministry staff are either Jewish themselves or they're married to a Jewish person in a Jewish family. And we make an impact for the kingdom of God amongst our Jewish people. So because of that, because of the time that we're in right now, we get invited to talk about all sorts of different conversations about the Middle East and Israel and things that verge on political. But what we love to say is that we're a one issue ministry. In that sense, all we really care about is that our Jewish people get the chance to meet the Messiah for themselves.
Awesome. And I'm a big believer into things that you've been delivered from. You are then called to deliver others who are in the same boat. And who better to reach Jews for Jesus than guys like yourself. And, thinking back to that family history and where that just changed the trajectory of your entire family. And so, to those listeners that may not be maybe as in tune with what's going on here, I want to kind of keep this at a one-on-one level. And so when we think about, all right, you're seeking and attempting to bring Jesus to the Jews. That may sound weird on surface level, right? Because you also mentioned that we're seeking the lost here. So help us think about that for those that may not be all that familiar with Bible history. Wasn't Jesus a Jew? That kind of thing. So
Yeah.
Calling people who are practicing Orthodox Judaism, calling those lost, help us think through that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, when you think about Jewish people believing in Jesus, it sounds to some like I'm saying vegans for bacon or something like that.
Right.
Like, because you don't put those things in the same sentence normally. But like you said, I mean, Jesus is Jewish. All of his disciples were Jewish. And like we like to say, all of the writers of the New Testament were Jewish except for Luke, but he was a doctor. So who knows? Maybe he was Jewish too.
Right.
There are a lot of Jewish doctors. But yeah, like when it came to salvation history and what we see happening within the gospel story, within the book of Acts and afterwards, is that there was large scale rejection of the gospel amongst my Jewish people, specifically within the rabbinic authorities after the destruction of the Second Temple. But in Acts, we see there's a whole bunch of religious Jewish people who were followers of Jesus, and Paul in the book of Romans calls Jewish believers in Jesus a remnant. So we know automatically right there, it's going to be a smaller percentage of the Jewish community that believes. That's his whole argument in Romans 9, 10, and 11, that there's this, God has not failed in his plan of salvation. His promises are not null and void just because a majority of Jewish people don't believe in Jesus. And what Paul demonstrates is that that's always been the case.
Yeah. It's the way that it's the way that it is. And that's not a surprise.
Not at all. It's part of his plan. And so when it comes to Judaism, a lot of Christians see, Judaism and they're reading the Old Testament. What's the problem with that? Isn't that just like Christianity minus Jesus?
Yeah, it's like pre-Christianity, right?
Yeah. And what we kind of have to unpack for a lot of people is like, no, Judaism is not like Old Testament only, and like it's not Christianity minus Jesus. It's if you add Jesus to Judaism, you don't get like Christianity. You get something totally different. That said, there are such things called Messianic Jews, which I would consider myself one. And there are Jewish manners of worshiping Jesus. So if you hear Messianic Judaism, it's kind of a loaded term. We can unpack in maybe another time. I don't know.
Sure.
But when it comes to the Jewish community, there's the Torah. That's like the main document.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the Tanakh, which is the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. That's what we consider the Old Testament, although in the Jewish Bible, it's written in a different order. But what most Jewish people read is not the Old Testament in its totality. It's commentary on the Torah written by rabbis much later than the Torah. And so that the entry point for engaging with what we consider to be God's word is actually already through a layer of commentaries and traditions and things that within Judaism they believe has to mediate our interaction with God's word.
Sure. And so then the next question I have is very similar to that. And it's for someone practicing Orthodox Judaism, how do they see Jesus? What's their view of Jesus?
Totally depends. There's been a major effort to reclaim Jesus as one of us. He was a good Jewish boy. He was maybe even a great teacher, a great rabbi. But then his followers turned him into something that he's not. So basically, kind of get gets like Jewish people around having to say negative things about Jesus, potentially. But it's the fault of Christians or, his followers that turned him into what they would call a false Messiah. But within the Jewish community, especially the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, we can get into those distinctions if you'd like. They wouldn't even say his name. It would be, we don't talk about that.
Gotcha. Off limits.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the distinction, right? Is what do you do with Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
You kind of have to wrestle with that. That's the hey, isn't that the worldwide dilemma?
Yeah. That's
the human dilemma. What do we do with Jesus?
Matthew 16, who do you say that I am?
Exactly.
That's the question.
It is. We all have to answer that. And depending on how you answer that depends on where you fall. But for those practicing Orthodox Judaism, Jesus is not the Messiah. Jesus is not God. He's not the second member of the Trinity. And so that changes everything. That's not just a Christianity minus Christ. I mean, you take away Christ, it's not Christianity. But, it's not that simple, is it? It's really an issue to where, they're still, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of waiting on a Messiah to come. Is that fair?
Again, it would depend on your Jewish background and what kind of sect of religion you kind of espouse. But
maybe oversimplistic then, yeah.
For the majority, I would say, of like devout, religious Orthodox Jews, then they would say, yes, the Messiah is yet to come.
Sure.
There's a lot of nuance within that. There's a whole sect, actually the largest sect of ultra-Orthodox Judaism, called Chabad, which you would see if you're in a major city and you're within a Jewish community or at a university. They're everywhere. There's only like one sect of Judaism that is like outreach oriented, trying to get other people to practice Judaism, and it's those guys.
Gotcha.
You'll see them at the mall trying to get Jewish people to wrap what's called tefillin, which are like these straps that have prayers written on them. And it's a way that they pray. But there's a percentage of those folks that actually believe that their chief rabbi, Menachem Schneerson, was the Messiah. And he was a rabbi who moved to New York in like 70s or moved earlier, but was primarily in ministry in New York in the 70s. And he was kind of a very wise man and like learned and kind of a sage. And there are some that think that he's the Messiah and that he's coming back.
Well, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And, it kind of comes down to this. Do you believe, again, who do you say I am, that Jesus is the way, the truth, the life? That there is one way to the Father, and it is Jesus.
That's right.
And that's kind of that's where it comes down to. Now, your family was reached with the gospel, and ever since then, again, your trajectory has changed, and you were raised as how would you identify yourself? A Christian Jew?
Yeah. It depends on like who you talk to, like their comfort level with using the term Christian. I have no problem calling myself a Jewish Christian. I usually like to make sure that the person I'm talking to knows what Christian means, because words are so important.
They are.
God created the world with words, and so he used the right ones.
They have power.
So when I talk about, what do you even know what Christian means? Christ is the Greek kind of transliteration of Christos. Christos was the Greek translation of Mashiach, which means Messiah. So you're a person of the Messiah. I have no problem identifying myself that way.
Yeah. And now you're perpetuating the gospel, as we all should do, and reaching the lost. And I love that, because the context that you're in is exactly where you're called to. And I want to talk about this a little bit too, because I'm fascinated by this idea that you're kind of in the middle of both sides. And, it's almost like Christians I'm sure maybe that there's some Christians that don't really quote unquote approve of what you're doing. I'm sure that there's some Jews that don't quote unquote approve of what you're doing. So you kind of find yourself in the middle a little bit, right? Like as an individual, but then also as Jews for Jesus. Talk to us about that a little bit. Unpack that situation to where you feel like you're, both sides really don't like what I'm doing, but yet I'm doing what I feel that God's called me to do, and where you find yourself there.
Sure. Yeah. And it's not really like something where on a day-to-day basis, I'm like, everyone hates me.
Right.
But thankfully, but yeah, depending
at least
on
not for that, right?
No, depending on who I'm talking to, they'll have kind of an incredulous look on their face when I mention, oh yeah, I work with Jews for Jesus. I love it because it gets into conversation. I hate small talk personally. So getting into the meat of what life and truth and existence are really about within a few seconds is pretty cool. So yeah, but for Jewish people to say that I'm with Jews for Jesus or that I'm a Jewish follower of Jesus, it can yield all sorts of reactions.
Sure. I can attest to that because I've told a couple of people, hey, I'm interviewing this guy with Jews for Jesus. So excited about it. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
No. You just wait.
Yeah.
It's all good stuff.
It's for Jewish folks, it's kind of well, that's a contradiction. That's impossible. For a lot of Jewish people, once you believe in Jesus, you're no longer Jewish. If you've been baptized, that you kind of have to turn in your Jewish card. And it's kind of the funniest thing because you can be Jewish and do just about any other spiritual practice under the sun. Believe whatever you want to believe, including that there's no God whatsoever and that Judaism and Jewish people is just this kind of ancient myth. And you're still Jewish. But the moment you place your faith in Jesus, you're one of them now.
Game changer. Yeah.
And to point out the inconsistencies within that is some of my life's work and what I enjoy the most. And so I love being able to have those conversations. But then, yeah, within the church as well, it can be a lightning rod for people because, like you were saying, aren't the Jewish people kind of good with God? Don't they have their own covenant?
Right.
why are you trying to stir the pot there? After so many years of church history where the Jewish people have been persecuted and the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition and stuff, can't we just leave the Jewish people alone and let them do their own thing? And it's kind of that's probably one of the least loving things you could possibly imagine. If you believe that ultimate truth, hope, love, fulfillment, meaning, joy, purpose, and eternity are found in knowing Jesus, and you want to keep that from Jewish people because of history, because of discomfort, because of whatever, you name it, that is a lack of love, ultimately. And we don't think of it that way. And I wouldn't say people are actively trying to do that when they say, oh, just leave them alone, whatever. But that's ultimately what it is. Because the most loving thing you can do as a believer in Jesus is to share Jesus winsomely, convictingly, sensitively with a person.
And that's so important. And being able to kind of shift your perspective of, if they're not believing in Jesus, then they're lost. Doesn't matter how old their religious structure is. Doesn't matter kind of what's happened through the ages. Just leaving them alone is the worst thing you could do. And we face a lot of that just in general with the Great Commission, right? Go and make disciples. Well, a lot of times we're scared to do that. Oh, I don't want to stir the pot, like you said. I don't want to disrupt people. We live in a society which kind of tells us we just need to live and let be. You do you, I do me. We'll agree to disagree. But you're right. You kind of come to this crisis of belief to where if you really believe what you say you believe, and you really believe that there is one way, truth in life, one way to the Father, then you're kind of confronted with this. Well, don't you want everyone to know that? And that's no different.
It's scary. I'm not going to pretend just because vocationally I do this and tell people about Jesus that it's become easier. It's absolutely terrifying to put yourself out there and to say, yeah, I believe there's ultimate truth. I believe this is the most important thing you can know. And I think that it's worth me being super discomforted right now and having this awkward conversation with you.
Yeah.
There's that classic interview, right, with Penn Jillette about getting pushed out of the way of a truck or something like that. And he said how much do you have to hate me to not push me out of the way of a truck? If the truck's bearing down on me, it's he is an atheist. He doesn't believe in Jesus at all, but he sees the importance of having a conviction when it comes to ultimate things, when it comes to eternal life. You got to do something about it.
Yeah. And that's a challenge to all of us, to everyone listening. So when it comes to Christians looking at the work you're doing, I think maybe this takes us to where you can describe for us a little bit about what it looks like on a daily basis to be a Jew for Jesus, so to speak. What does that look like in your daily life, and how does that differ from, I'm going to say, us Gentiles, those who aren't in the Jewish faith, who don't come from that custom and don't come from that background? How is that different? Because I think a lot of times we get our belief system that, okay, well, if you were a Jew, now you're a Christian, now you just give all that up, from some of Paul's words that weren't necessarily meant to be taken the way that we take them sometimes. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Just walk us through your walk with God, if you will.
Yeah, sure. There's the personal practice things that I think is up to, honestly, every person's conviction and their conscience and how God leads them. And within my family, we celebrate Shabbat on Friday night, and we observe that. And we don't do it in a way that a lot of the Jewish community would, where you turn off all the lights and you can't do any work and that kind of stuff. But it's an important rhythm for us to stay connected to the Jewish community and really understand that God gave us this weekly rhythm of a day of rest for a reason. And every time a society's tried to do away with that, it's been detrimental for what it means to be human. So there's that part of things. But I mean, we're here talking actually at the beginning of the Feast of Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. So just last night, my team and I built a sukkah, which is a temporary dwelling place, like a little tent outside of our building here that is a reminder of our wilderness dwelling when we were kind of wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and remembers that God provided for us and gave us everything that we need, manna and shelter and water, all of these things. And it happens in the 7th month on the Jewish calendar of Tishri, after the high holidays, which just happened days earlier, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement. And what's really kind of cool about this to understand from a Christian perspective is these aren't just Jewish holidays that might have been celebrated by Jesus, but they actually speak about his plan of salvation. It's through the festivals that he actually lived his ministry and fulfilled all of his word. So there are these spring festivals that happen that are all connected to Passover. That's typically it's around Easter. Passover and Easter are connected. And those were all fulfilled during Jesus's earthly ministry. But this ultimate significance and meaning of the fall feasts, the ones that I just mentioned, those are pointing forward to Jesus's second coming, his return. So the Feast of Tabernacles, which we're in the midst of right now, is ultimately about God's dwelling place. In John chapter 1, when it said the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, the Word is tabernacle.
Tabernacle, yep.
So he's in our dwelling place. He took on flesh. He's like God incarnate, dwelling within this temporary shelter of this human body, which is now ultimately eternal. But in Revelation chapter 21, it says, now the dwelling of God is with man. So there's this ultimate consummation of the Feast of Tabernacles when God will ultimately tabernacle with his people in this kind of final way of New Jerusalem. So it's an anticipation, and I think we do ourselves a bit of a disservice to not understand that. I'm not saying people need to celebrate it necessarily. I think there's a weird conversation you can have about cultural appropriation when it comes to that. But the Jewish festivals are not just simply things that are so mired in Jewish tradition that we can't understand them. They're biblical feasts that point to God's kind of prophetic calendar of what he's doing in the world.
Absolutely. A lot of Jesus's I am statements came during some of those. And, really kind of seeing his fulfillment, especially like you said, in some of those spring events. I love the way you just described that, because it's easy to think about, okay, yeah, these festivals, these feasts are just a way of looking back at the history and everything. But it's not only looking back, but it's looking ahead at the same time. Looking at, there's something to be said. I mean, that's the reason we have the Old Testament is to be able to realize the big story of God. The story of God doesn't start with Jesus. The story of God is fulfilled in Jesus.
That's right.
And being able to look back at God's people, because that's who we're talking about here, right? God's chosen people, the ancient Jewish culture. And those were moments that God ordained so that they would remember. So there is value in remembering, but there's also this forward-looking approach too, looking for Jesus to be the ultimate fulfillment in them. And to me, that's rich. To me, that's a deeper understanding of who Jesus is than maybe we get if we don't understand that. And so so you celebrate Shabbat? Shabbat on Friday night.
Friday evening, and my wife will make a challah, which is a traditional like braided bread loaf. Okay. And within our ministry here, so like Jews for Jesus ministry looks different all around the world. We kind of contextualize what we do depending on the community we're speaking to. Our ministry here in LA happens right across the street from UCLA campus, and we have a coffee, art, and community space called Upside Down that we built a few years ago. And it's a great introduction to all of this stuff. When somebody doesn't understand how can Jewish people believe in Jesus and like what's that all about, to have that conversation over a cup of coffee in kind of like a chill, laid back space, way better as like a first step than like, let's say, like an online conversation with like a troll or like, some kind of like heated street debate. Mm. It's a really great place to do that. So like here in our cafe space, we do events pretty frequently. And just last week we did a challah braiding workshop. So we actually taught people how to make the bread that you eat for Shabbat. And within that, we'll kind of like weave some of our traditions and prayers and stuff and instructing people and inviting people to ask us questions. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Now, do you guys attend church on Sundays? And so that's the, of course, the celebration day, that's the resurrection day, and, you join with other believers. And so, I think that's important for us to understand is that, you hold these same beliefs, but you're also practicing some of the things from your culture, but it's not taking away from your understanding of God or Jesus. It's enhancing it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a wide spectrum of practice within Jewish believers in Jesus. Like I said, some prefer to call themselves Messianic Jews, and they'll have their primary worship service on a Saturday morning, have a Shabbat service, read from the Torah, just like you would in a synagogue, but explain how Jesus fulfills all of that, and continue to have prayers from a Jewish prayer book, which a Jewish prayer book is all, liturgy from the Bible. It's Psalms, it's, the prophets and all that kind of stuff. So there's richness in that as well. But yeah, for my family, I actually serve as an elder at my local church here on the west side of LA. It's called Collective Church. And there's a handful of Jewish followers of Jesus who are a part of our community, but we're multicultural, multi-ethnic, like all different ages, et cetera.
Very cool. And so you're worshiping with other non-Jewish Christians, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that.
I think it's a picture of the kingdom, man.
I do too.
Like every tribe, tongue, and nation, that's where we're going.
Yeah. A lot of times we tend to segregate ourselves in the church, and that's a different conversation for a different day maybe, but I love that it's just a mix. It's a multicultural, multi-ethnic. That's what heaven's going to be.
That's right.
And that's what heaven on earth is going to be when he comes back. And so when we think about what does it look like to minister to someone, to witness to someone, fill in the blank, whatever word you want to use there, evangelize to someone who is Jewish, what sort of language might you use to someone who is so entrenched in their ancient heritage and customs to get them to see, okay, well, maybe there's something to this Jesus guy?
Yeah. So glad you asked that. So the day we're recording this is October 7th. So 2 years ago marks it's the anniversary of this like terrible attack on Israel, which is not just about, some kind of political feud in the Middle East. It affected the Jewish community around the world and led to like an increase in antisemitism everywhere. So Jewish people are feeling the impact of that and are feeling scared and uncertain and not sure who to trust. Mm-hmm. So as Gentile Christians, you actually have probably a more important opportunity than ever before to communicate a sense of love and support and cultivate trust with Jewish folks that you know. There has never been a better time that I've been alive that a Christian who is not Jewish can have a positive impact on a Jewish person, beginning to open up to the possibility of understanding Jesus and trusting him. Because the first layer that needs to be eroded between a Jewish person, well, really anyone, but specifically for the Jewish community and faith in Jesus, is trusting a Christian. And there's so many reasons throughout history that Jewish people have been given to not trust Christians. Nowadays, it wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, this Christian wants to do me harm. But, if I get to know this Christian, they're just going to shove Jesus down my throat the next time I get together with them. So demonstrating a genuine care and interest in Jewish people, just purely from a place of saying, I stand against antisemitism. I want to support you. I believe, like the Bible tells me, like that you're loved by God just by virtue of who you are. He set his affection on the Jewish people. It doesn't mean they're better than anyone else. Doesn't mean like they're, super special and have superpowers or whatever. But it was God's choice, and for that reason, I will stand against hatred and I'll stand with you. That's a powerful thing.
Yeah, mutual understanding goes a long ways with anybody, really.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hearing is it's not that different than anybody else. You got to find common ground.
You do.
You've got to say, drop the agenda. If we're loving someone with an agenda, then that's not really loving them.
That's right.
And
I often say to people, so we actually have been encouraging Christians to stand against anti-Semitism. So if there's a way that you can stand visibly and vocally in your community, I would encourage you to do it. And we encourage, if a Jewish person were to approach you and say, hey, you're just doing this to share Jesus with me, aren't you? To respond saying do I believe that Jesus is the ultimate hope for the world and can bring you love and joy and truth? Absolutely. But today, I'm just here to support you. That's so important because for a lot of Christians who are zealous to share the gospel, they would think that settling and falling short of declaring the truth of the gospel to anyone is compromise.
Mm.
And I'm here to say, no, it's not. Mm. You're working the long game, and God is a patient God, and He's after people, and there's nothing that you're going to do that is going to detract from that.
Man, that's awesome. Now, you'd mentioned, and maybe we can kind of close this way. You'd mentioned that 2 years ago was that attack on Israel. Israel has been in the news an awful lot over the last several months, years. And it feels like Israel's always in the news. There's an intense battle going on right now. And I've had people ask me, why do we as Christians, why is it that we're so involved? Why isn't it that we care? Why is it that it's important to us as Christians what happens in Israel? For you, Jews for Jesus, or just you, Isaac, how would you answer that question for a sincere believer, curious as to what's so important about that land of Israel and what happens over there today?
Yeah, I would say it's really important to know what we're talking about. We're talking about Israel. When you say Israel, that you're not equivocating the modern state of Israel with the biblical Israel, that you're not kind of assigning any kind of spiritual significance to the government of Israel, that you're not deifying the prime minister of Israel. There's a lot of misunderstanding amongst well-meaning Christian folks who say, we're supposed to support Israel.
Yeah, I stand with Israel. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay, why? Do you know what that means? To not just kind of say, it's my duty as an evangelical Christian to do that, to not make it about politics.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It's so important. So I would say make a distinction between the historical importance of the land, the political entity and the people, and know that absolutely the land is significant, and know that God is at work in the land of Israel, but that when it comes to supporting Israel, the best way that you can support Israel is with the gospel. It behoove a Christian to get mired and enmeshed in Middle Eastern politics as an important tenet of our faith. The best thing that we can do as followers of Jesus to support Israel is to ensure that the people there have access to hear about the Messiah. And that will keep you from a lot of the ways that people tend to capitulate towards political talking points and rhetoric when it comes to preferring Israelis over Palestinians. That's not God. That's not his heart.
Yeah. No favoritism, right?
Not at all. Reconciliation is the closest thing to the heart of God. So when an Israeli and a Palestinian can say to one another, I love you in the name of Jesus, then the world will see the reconciling power of the gospel. And so that's what we pray for. It's happening. It's not in the headlines, and it's harder more than ever because of the current conflict there. And there is challenge. There is enmity that happens. But I know that there are, and I've met in Israel, Israeli believers, Palestinian believers who love one another, who fellowship together. And that should really be where our focus is, where our prayers are going, is to see those kinds of things happen, not to make some kind of pronouncement about what you see in the headlines equaling God's favor or disfavor over certain groups of people.
Yeah. That's so powerful. And what we're saying here is this. If you want to be like Christ, if you want to let Jesus come out in your life, then what that looks like is seeing people for how Jesus sees them. As a soul worth dying for, as a soul worth reaching, as a soul worth loving, regardless of where they live, regardless of where they come from, regardless of their culture, regardless of their current religious system. I think if we could learn to see like Jesus, that would fix a lot of our problems. What a powerful way to say, support Israel. The best way we can support Israel is with the gospel. Powerful. And that answers my question of how do we pray for Israel? And I think that's right in line. Man, Isaac, this has been fun. We may have to do a second round of this. I have so many questions.
Be happy to.
But you're doing fantastic work where God's called you to. Can you tell us about how we can get involved with the mission and purpose of Jews for Jesus and come alongside you guys and support you?
Absolutely. We are inviting Christians to do a few different things to support. We have a page on our website that's just jewsforjesus.org/get involved. And the primary ways to do that are prayer. If you're a prayer warrior, if you love praying for some of the things that we've been talking about, there's kind of a monthly prayer connect that one of our staff is holding that kind of gives you a more in-depth look at what our ministry is doing. And we send out prayer reminders, so you could just sign up there. There's also this resource that we put together called the Jews for Jesus Classroom. And that is for people who are interested in actually developing their witness to the Jewish community and learning more about how to share the gospel winsomely with the Jewish community. And it's an absolutely free resource that you just sign up for. That's a 3-course video series with multiple videos per course and a couple talking points and questions with each session. And you can walk through it in a few days. And it's a great introductory resource for how to share the gospel with Jewish people. So if you're in a community where you have Jewish friends, neighbors, coworkers, whatever, I would implore you to check that out, and we'd love to connect with you and be able to help you in your witness as well.
That's awesome. I'll put those links in the show notes as well. But Isaac, man, you're a blessing. I appreciate you being here with us, explaining to us how the same God that saved your family, that came into your family and changed the trajectory in just a few generations ago, is the same God that's calling and pursuing all people today to him. To my listeners out there that are hearing this, I encourage you to check out the resources we're going to list, check out the work Isaac's doing. And what we're talking about here is just sharing Jesus with those around you. And in this particular context today, with the Jewish culture. But you know what? If you really believe what you say you believe, you'll share the truth of Jesus with everyone around you, regardless of where they come from. So, Isaac, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Chad.
We may plan to do this again sometime soon, but bless you, bless your work, and look forward to joining you again soon.
Thanks, man. God bless you as well.
Thank you for listening to the RevRx podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today, and if so, we'd love it if you would hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss a new episode from us. Also, feel free to leave us reviews and comments, as we'd love to hear from you. Be blessed and be the very best you.